Welcome back to another episode of Peeping Ballers. We got a very special episode on tap for you guys. The USMNT have finally hired a head coach, and boy, it's a pretty special name. Mauricio Pochettino is going to be making his way over the pond to lead us to the 2026 World Cup. I'm your host, Albert, joined by Michael. Mike, when you saw this news drop, man, what was your first reaction?
Shock. I was honestly shocked. I was like, we got that guy? This is absolutely huge. I'm thinking about my lifetime, the coaches of the U.S. men's national team when I've been around. This feels like the best coach. I think I've lived through or been a fan of Bruce Arena's era, Bob Bradley, of course, great era. Jurgen Klinsmann, kind of mixed. We went back to Bruce Arena. That was really bad. Greg Berhalter, absolute failure. But now, we're getting, he was the best manager on the market. The best one that they could have possibly gotten, not named Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp was never happening, but that they got Mauricio Pochettino, this is amazing. I'm so happy about it.
Yeah. I mean, Pochettino is one of those names we thought would always stay in European football, I think, but he's had a bit of a bad run recently with PSG and then most recently with Chelsea. But we still have to remember, this guy's resume is still pretty stellar compared to most international managers. Led a pretty okay Tottenham team to the final of the Champions League, and considering who he deals with in Daniel Levy, a guy who doesn't buy players to help his first team, he buys players to develop them, and because he buys them when they're young and cheap, it's really a big accomplishment what Pochettino did. Now, I think there are some issues with Poch in the sense that there were times at Tottenham he did make mistakes in terms of the starting lineup. His tactics got a little stale, a little old. But in terms of if you look at this from an international football perspective, like Mike said, this is probably the biggest name you could have gotten besides Jurgen Klopp out of all the available managers. And I'm curious to see what the salary specifics will be. I don't think those have been released yet, but I'm sure they are paying him a pretty bag to come over to the States.
I think that we all thought that, he would either get another club job or maybe take the Argentina national team job, or something like that, a really prestigious, high paying job. And I think this might be the first time that the U.S. men's national team really kind of asserted this on themselves and said we're that. We're a prestigious, high paying job. So we'll see what they're paying them. But in terms of optics and in terms of fit, I think that this is great. My reason for that is he doesn't really know any of these men's national team players at all. I can't even think of one he's actually coached as a club manager because, he didn't overlap really with Pulisic very much because they sold him essentially right after Pochettino got there. I can't really think of anyone he may know the goalkeeper for the U.S. men's national team, Gaga Slonina. That's maybe the one guy he's seen as a coach, but he didn't have any American players when he was coaching Tottenham. He didn't have any American players when he was coaching PSG. He didn't have any American players when he was coaching Southampton. So he's not going to know these guys, which is really, really important because the big problem that Greg Berhalter had, other than the fact that he's a bad manager, was that he knew these guys way too well. He'd coached some of them at Columbus Crew, or he'd seen them so much as they were kids and knew their parents so well that he was kind of clouded with bias over which players are good and which players are not good. We need to find out who's good and who's not good. We need to find out who's overrated in this player pool, who needs to go, and who needs to stick around. Because I do think that there are some players in this men's national team setup that maybe shouldn't be there anymore. Are we sure that Weston McKennie really deserves a starting spot anymore? We don't know that. There could be better midfielders than him. It's the same thing, let's say, with Tyler Adams or Tim Weah. He's got to take a look at all these players with a fresh eye and tell us, these are the guys I want to play with me. So that's one thing. He doesn't know them. The other thing that's big is he's a culture builder. When he was at Tottenham, he built this amazing culture with a ragtag bunch of guys that, they were not fancied in the sense of Champions League final squad, but he turned them into that. And that was huge. He demanded the best from them. He trained the heck out of them. And, they ran through walls for him, and they became a really amazing team. If he can do that with this squad, we really like need to try harder, then yeah, that's gonna be great.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think a big problem with former USMNT managers, especially for the past decade, is the fact that they've been so connected to US soccer. Even the foreigners, Jurgen Klinsmann has lived in the United States for well over 20 years. He has his US green card. He's lived in California. He's been
Mm-hmm.
around the setup. He knows a lot of these players. Greg Berhalter, obviously, is a former national player. Bruce Arena, obviously, we know has been in
Mm-hmm.
the system for forever. So it's almost the first time in our lifetime as adults that we're seeing a manager manage the U.S. that has no connection with the country, is coming kind of from a fresh slate, and will have no bias and no maybe kind of nepotistic connections to any of these players, which is important because
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be said about some of these players getting their spots because of their name value instead of their actual playing ability or their form. And it's important.
G-Arena.
And you know what? For a home World Cup, you can't mess this up. And I think that if we're being honest, like, yeah, Poch took the job mainly because it's a home World Cup. There's a lot of prestige. If he does well, there'll be a lot of attention on him, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
media. He'll definitely be gassed up and be a prime candidate for maybe a Real Madrid when Ancelotti leaves. So it works for
Mm-hmm.
Poch in the sense of, kind of bouncing back for his professional career, but also works for the USMNT tactically in the sense that we're getting a progressive manager who also doesn't care about the players in the sense that, like, he doesn't have a connection with them. It's like everyone's starting from zero. If you play well, you'll play, hopefully, right? So that's one big thing that I think is great about this hire. And to be honest, this hire reminds me a lot of Germany hiring Julian Nagelsmann about a year before the European Championships. Again, Nagelsmann is a young manager like Poch, who had been fired at a big club, kind of needed to make a name for himself again, kind of to prove that he was the golden boy that everyone hyped him out to be. And a name that you didn't expect to work in international football so earlier in their careers. But Poch is still relatively young for a manager, I think. So it's a good way for him to kind of reintroduce himself to the world. And what better stage than 2026 World Cup that's going to be held in North America? I'm aware from reports that Poch will not be based in the United States. They will not require him to live in either Chicago or Atlanta. I hate to say it, but for these European guys, they do like living in Europe for good reason. And it's nice to see that U.S. soccer is being flexible with the fact that Poch can watch the guys play in Europe because a lot of them are playing the top leagues there anyway. And when he needs to, he flies over here for the games, for friendlies, and to see maybe a few MLS players. But I think that flexibility is really what's key and probably what made him take this job. There's not much to like pick apart for this hiring, man. It seems like a pretty solid hire, and I guess now we're just talking like expectations, Mike. What is the bare minimum you would accept from this USMNT in 2026? And what do you think is going to happen? So what's your expectation and what do you think is going to happen?
I just want to like track back a little bit on what you just said in terms of like his living in Europe. This makes so much sense, right? Most of his core starting lineup plays in the biggest European leagues right now, right? So he can hop around there and watch them, right? He can have he should probably have like a US based like staff member, and obviously Matt Crocker, the technical director of the US men's national team, will help him with that.
Yeah.
And basically, they'll be like, "Hey man, we've been watching some MLS matches. You might want to come over to the States and watch this guy in person at a match. See this guy because he's been playing really well. He might be a good fit for you, right?" It'd be perfect. But does he need to live in Chicago? Does he need to live near the soon to be constructed Atlanta Training Center? No, he doesn't need to do that. But all right, to your real question, expectations. I would love to see this guy win a couple knockout stage matches. That's been kind of like in the past 10-ish years, the thing we're struggling with, right? 2014. Jurgen had a very winnable game against Belgium. He probably should have won that game if he had managed the game better. It's just, it came down to like little things at the end, right? Obviously, we missed a couple shots. Chris Wondolowski just kind of fluffed his lines, did not score when he could have. So we lost that game. Same thing in 2022. We maybe wanted to compete a little bit more with Netherlands in that match. So the new format's going to be a 48-team group stage, and then we're going to start with the round of 32. So there's a couple more knockout stage matches. I'd like to see us win 2 of them. Win the round of 32. Maybe get a good competitive opponent in the round of 16 and win that one. Let's get to the quarterfinals. That's what I'd like to see. I can't imagine we're ready for like semifinals, final, anything like that yet. But let's try to get to the quarterfinals. Let's do that. What about you, man? What do you think?
Man, dude, the quarterfinals have always been my bare minimum for this tournament. I think you have to win the round of 32. To me is like a gimmick, just because you expand the World Cup. You have to win a round of 16 match. I know it's tough, but if we want to progress, if we want to be seen as a country that makes the knockouts consistently, you have to win at least one knockout stage game. I would be totally happy with getting knocked out in the quarterfinals. Given the way the brackets could turn out, I wouldn't be super angry if they got knocked out in the round of 16 just because they could come up against a bigger country. But I mean, you got to at least put up a better fight than you did, especially in that 2022 World Cup when Louis van Gaal absolutely schooled Berhalter. That game wasn't close.
No, it was not actually.
Made some incredible saves. So it has to be a point where you're just a little more competitive against these bigger teams because, you see teams from other continents like Morocco at the last World Cup, not a lot of resources, but a great team with a lot of fighting spirit, making it hard for Portugal, for Belgium, for Spain. You have to get to a point where if you're not beating all these teams all the time, you still have to be a lot more competitive than we once were. I think Poch is good enough to at least get to the round of 16. Is he a good enough manager, or can he find that magic spark to get us to the quarterfinals? That remains to be seen. But yeah, best case scenario is a quarterfinal appearance, and anything can happen. Like I wouldn't put it past the U.S. to make it to semis if things fell for them the right way. But the main thing here is just to have a better vibe around the team, I think, to get the fan base back on board, because a lot of fans just have really turned on the USMNT, especially after, the Copa America, with how toxic that appearance was and just the crap surrounding Berhalter and the Federation after the 2022 World Cup. It's almost about getting the vibes back, and then we'll see how well we do on the pitch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get to start in September and, play some friendlies. There's big plans to host a nice little tournament next summer, the Gold Cup, to see if they can really invite some good squads to challenge that squad and, get them ready for what it's like to be in a tournament atmosphere 1 year before the real tournament. It's hard being the host, right? You don't have to qualify for the World Cup. So you kind of have to make up your 4 years and find tournaments or elite friendlies to play with really hard teams to get yourself ready, because you don't have those competitive World Cup qualifying matches, right? This is such a good hire. Matt Crocker brought out the contact list, called one of his old buddies from Southampton, made it happen. This is absolutely huge, because this is also for me, it kind of represents Matt Crocker just kind of telling the USMNT, the US Soccer Federation guys, shut up. Hey, I don't want to hear anything more about your favorite American MLS coach. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear about Steve Cherundolo being the right guy to lead this national team. No, stop. He's I did it once. Okay, guys? I listened to you guys. I rehired Greg Berhalter for you guys, and look how that worked out. And so he was let me cook. Let me find my own guy that I think will be the best fit. And lo and behold, he gets us Mauricio Pochettino. Absolutely huge. Great job, Matt Crocker. Great job.
Yeah, I mean, after the Berhalter rehiring, I think it was impossible for us to imagine that they would actually hire somebody competent. But the fact that they've really turned it around shows that they're taking this seriously, and they should, because it's I've said this before, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity where we're going to see a World Cup in North America, right? You're going to have people who don't even care about sports watching because it's going to be right in their faces. And to have a manager with the status, with the reputation of a Pochettino, it brings a little more respect to the USMNT on the world stage, and I think that's really important, because a lot of Europeans see a lot of the USMNT players as a bit overrated, I think, and there's a fair argument for that, I think. So if you have the right guy in place and then the results come, then after Poch leaves, I think he'll leave after the World Cup, you'll see maybe, I don't know, another big guy coming and saying, you know what, this is a job that I want. This job becomes a lot more prestigious. So it takes only one guy, and hopefully Poch is the start of that. I think the USMNT did a much better job hiring their manager than the KFA. Topic for another video, but I think we're both glad, Michael, that as Korean Americans, one of our countries has done something right in the lead up to the World Cup.
Yeah. No, I mean, we could definitely talk about, how this is a much better hire than, the KMT's hire of Hong Mung Bo. But before we leave, I think the one thing that I also want to say about this hire is this hire will put to bed whether it's the manager or the players, right? Because there's always been like that thought, like, is Greg Berhalter holding these guys back, right? But now we can find out if these players are really good. Because I think that's one thing that I just want to say, like, we don't know if this golden generation of USMNT players are actually good. Because under Greg Berhalter, they won at really unprecedented levels for the U.S. men's national team. Like, they ruled CONCACAF. They won games in CONCACAF a lot more than they'd done in the past, right? So that's great. But whenever it came time to play a competitive team, a good team, they always shit the bed. They never played good. They didn't beat anybody of note, not named Mexico. So now that you've got this great manager with a really good reputation, we'll now see, is it like, are the players good enough? Are they actually good enough? And if they don't do well over the next couple of years with, Mauricio Pochettino, then we know, okay, they weren't a golden generation of players. We're going to rebuild. We're going to start over again. We'll try some new players and we'll just, go from there. But yeah, now it's a really like put up or shut up time for like Christian Pulisic, Tim Weah, Weston McKennie, Gio Reyna, all these guys that have been heralded as this golden generation. They have to show us now because they've got a really serious manager to work under. They've got some really huge tournaments coming up for themselves. They should really put on a good performance. They really have to.
And we'll be rooting for the boys and hopefully having a lot of special content for you at Peeping Ballers as we get close to the 2026 World Cup. I got the Gold Cup next year as well. Hopefully some special stuff for that. But in the meantime, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We'll link all our socials down in the description. Till then, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.